So the sorcery guys hit me up over the break and asked if they could send us a few things. And then they sent me 30 pounds of sorcery cards. So,
give or take.
Yeah, been checking out sorcery. And I think we're ready to sort of talk about it. This isn't going to be a definitive video on sorcery, but more just our first impressions and, you know, what we think about it.
I think it's also important to note that just because sorcery was kind enough to go and give us all this product, they have not told us that we need to say anything nice, positive. They didn't say anything specific.
Our reviews are all unsponsored and we say everything we think, as you'll see later in this video.
Distraction makers.
If you're not familiar with Sorcery, this is going to be a very quick rundown. Sorcery is a 1v1 trading card game. It was designed by Eric Olafsson and Nicholas Reynolds.
Eric Olafsson used to be I think the creative director on Path of Exile.
That sounds right, yeah. Both players play avatars that are attempting to take out the other avatar, represented by an avatar card. You do so by playing sites to a 4x5 battlefield called the Realm that will allow you to play spells. Players have a separate deck for their sites and spells. The more sites that you end up playing allow you to play more powerful spells. Players can move their units and avatar to different sites. Striking an opponent's site will deal damage to them directly, but once your opponent drops to 0 health, they enter into what's called Death's Door. When a player is at Death's Door, the final point of damage you do to them has to be directly to their avatar in order for you to defeat them.
I think one of the biggest differentiators here is that sorcery's played on a grid. Because they have this grid, it allows them to have a bit more specificity with where things are located. There's proximity of units and avatars and like the sites of like where your lands are played. So some people might describe this as sort of a combination of Magic and chess. This also allows for additional design space. So cards can have area of effects. They can affect nearby or adjacent units. They can move in different ways because traversing the realm is a big part of the way that your units function.
I think when you have an actual literal grid, it does something a little bit different to your brain. The way you end up thinking about things, the way you're trying to solve problems, the way that problems are presented to you is just a lot different than if you're playing a game like Magic or usual other traditional TCGs that have just sort of like a my side, your side sort of a problem to solve.
Sure. Yeah. Another big separator is that they have different decks for your resources and your spells, and they also have a third deck that is called the Collection, which is similar to a sideboard. This was added with the most recent set, Gothic. So your decks will consist of a 30-card Atlas deck, which is where your sites are located. And then you have a 60-card spell book, which is where your spells and units are located. And then you have a 10-card collection, which is, like I said, effectively a sideboard, but also there are cards that access your collection when you play them.
Kind of like Lessons in Magic.
It's kind of like Lessons in Magic, yeah. And part of this is because sorcery is played best of one. Cards that you want in very specific scenarios aren't in your deck. They are accessible outside of it in this collection, basically.
Something else as far as how decks are constructed that's a little bit different is that they actually have certain limitations on how many cards you can have, how many copies of a card you can have based off of rarity, which I'm actually happy to see. I don't know a lot of games that do this. There's been a handful. Altered is one that did something similar. And they expanded on this a little bit. So they have 4 rarities, technically. They've got Ordinary, Exceptional, Elite, and Unique. You can have 4 copies of any one ordinary card, 3 copies of any exceptional, 2 of elite, and 1 unique card.
Yeah, and there's actually a 5th secret rarity that has nothing to do with game rules that are called curios, which are exceedingly rare cards that have alternative art or some kind of quirk about them that players sort of have to discover whenever a site comes out. So this is more part of the collectability side of the game, but it is something unique and interesting. So to come back to the way that you sort of play your spells have a threshold requirement. The way that the threshold system works is that there are 4 elemental types in the game that are earth, fire, air, and water. Spells and units will have a threshold cost on the card, which says like, okay, well, this requires you to have 2 air threshold in order to play it. But it also has a resource cost. So the number of sites that are in play determine how many resources you have at the beginning of your turn. And then if you have to meet this threshold cost amongst your sites as well, which your sites will have a symbol on them too that says, hey, you have 1 air or 2 air. And if you meet the threshold and can pay the mana cost, I think it's called mana in the game. And then you can play the spell or unit then.
It's very similar to Devotion from Magic, but sort of a lot closer to the system level, where Devotion is a lot more of just like, well, this is a mechanic you occasionally might see on a card here and there if they decide to print it. But this is like pretty much every spell has some sort of a threshold,
it has like a threshold
associated
cost.
with it.
Even things like sites sometimes will have a threshold requirement, and they get sort of an additional effect if you have enough of those sites. There's some interesting ones that like, if you have like 3 fire sites, you get like an additional effect when you play the.
I just played one that had I had 8 of water threshold.
Yeah. That was
to turn into a giant monster.
That was cool.
That was cool.
Yeah. Another unique aspect is that there is no interaction on your opponent's turn. It is played at sorcery speed.
Right. I have in the notes here to play a laugh track, so I'll just let you. Okay. Put that in.
Okay.
This is something that's sort of it's a unique part of this particular game. It's not the only card game on the market that has this as no interaction. Talked about potential issues with this. We're going to get into those potential pros, cons, etc. of no interaction on your opponent's turn later on. But yeah, for the most part, I mean, you can't cast anything on your opponent's turn. The closest thing you could do is you can defend. So there's just a mechanic that allows you to sort of go in and intervene when someone's trying to go and take over a site near one of your units.
Yeah, you can't play spells or add additional units to the field or anything like that.
Right. So all information on the battlefield at that point in time is known information when you're making decisions.
I think this is tangentially related to the sort of limited interaction on your opponent's turn, but the death door mechanic, basically, right, where for you to actually be defeated in the game, your opponent must take you to 0 life points, and then you always get an additional turn, and then once they hit you one more time on a later turn, then you would actually lose the game. And I think this is a solution for one of the major problems that happens with only sorcery speed interaction is that if your opponent can just like win the game all in one turn, there's basically, you have no agency to stop them. So here, this is one of the ways that they've tried to alleviate that problem.
Final note here is that all of the artwork, every single piece, every image is all traditionally hand-painted artwork.
Yes.
Which is pretty insane.
It's unheard of in this day and age, but I think is becoming more and more important as AI has begun to, wreak havoc across every industry. But not only that, there's even an additional bonus here that I think a lot of people would not know is such a big deal. The artists keep their copyrights to the images. So quite a few of the images in the game are also licensed from artists. They've licensed art from Braum, Frank Frazetta. But not only, is this artwork done traditionally, because the artists get to keep the copyrights to their images. I don't know if they have like an exclusivity for an amount of time contract or how that works, but the fact that the artist can keep the copyrights, they could use this art elsewhere. It might not exist only exclusively for sorcery, and also sorcery, like that's a big asset for these for the artists, especially if sorcery wants to do any kind of like reprints or anything. There's a possibility that they would have to relicense the artwork from the artists, which is great. This is how it used to be done, right? It wasn't always work for hire back in like Frank Frazetta's time. Him especially was a big proponent of artists maintaining copyright to their work. So,
right,
big deal.
Yeah.
One last note on the art. There's also a lot of artists who were early Magic artists.
I was very happy to see Quentin Hoover.
Yeah, Quentin Hoover, Ed Beard Jr. They had him do some of the dragons, which is there's a lot of little Magic Easter egg throwbacks to check out. So.
Yeah, very cool to see that. All right, let's get into our thoughts.
Into
our opinions.
What do we like? I think for me, right off the bat, the thing that struck me was how much it felt like playing Magic when I was young, to the point where it's not just that feeling of learning a new game. It's also the feeling that the way that the cards are presented and the way that they're written is very unique and experimental. It feels like there's still a lot more to discover.
To summarize, I think my experience when playing, I didn't really play old school Magic at that level, right? I came more in Ravnica era, which is a little bit after they'd still experimented and stuff, but not quite as much as like Chaos Orb back in the day or something. But I keep feeling like charming is like the feeling I get when I play this game. Like going and reading some of the cards, some of the silliness of it, but some of the immersion of it too, I'm like, oh, that's like cute almost. It's like it's charming. And I don't mean that in a demeaning way. Like, I think when you say it feels like old school Magic, I think that's something I hear a lot of players mention when they talk about sorcery, because that's, I think their primary audience is disenfranchised Magic players. I hope people don't take that as like, oh, well, I wouldn't understand because I didn't play Magic back then.
Right. No, it's not like that at all.
I think you can capture that feeling. I think they did a good job of capturing what that feeling is. And now players that didn't get to experience that could play this and now see kind of what that feeling was like of playing that old school Magic.
I'm trying to decide how much of this feeling comes down to the fact that like there's only 3 sets for the game so far, right? There's the initial alpha beta set, which is one set. The alpha was just from the Kickstarter. Beta was like the first actual printed print run they did of it. And then there's Arthurian Legends, and then there's Gothic, which is the new one that came out recently. And that's what you have to work with right now, right? which is still a card pool, I think, of nearing at least 1,000 cards, but the game is still still being understood, right? And there's still, and I feel like the designers working on the game are going to keep this type of feeling. Like, it feels very much like they have a clear vision about what they want the game to be, and they want the game to feel in some ways like how early Magic did before Magic started to become figured out or like taken to a level of exactness that I think took out some of the character potentially.
Right. When you have a lot of players playing your game, you're getting a lot of feedback, right? You're getting a lot of data on how people are experiencing something. I think it can lead you to decisions of sort of shaving off or shaving down those rough edges. Yes. And I think that what this game maintains is its rough edges and like wears proudly. And I think that is what adds charm. And that's what sort of can, I think, cause some divisiveness, I think, potentially with players, which we'll get into. But I think that at the same time, that's also one of its greatest strengths.
We talked before about the sort of scale between abstraction and simulation, and we'll probably get more into this later when we talk about sort of design specifics. But this game feels like it's either 1 or 2 steps more into the simulation category. And because of that, it's able to tell stories that are very evocative, right? Like, you have the grid, you have sites, like basically a setting for where your units are, and so the story can unfold because you have like sort of more details of that story, where I'd say something like Magic is like 1 or 2 steps closer to the abstract side of things, where like you still have creatures and there's kind of a story unfolding, but it's more like those creatures just sort of exist in a void and they attack each other, and it's a bit, and I think because of that there's a bit more focus on the mechanical. And here, adding a bit more complexity and a bit more, I guess, upkeep so that you get more of that story.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it is one of the strongest aspects of the game, I think, is that story that emerges when you play the game.
Right. I think, and touching on story, I think that, yeah, the combination of the artwork, the way that it is, and the story and the flavor of the cards and stuff, I think all of that, we talk a lot about like top-down game design, and this is just like a completely top-down, feels very top-down.
Everything in the game is top-down.
And a lot of the times when you look at a Magic set, I won't even say like modern Magic sets, but even back in the day, there's this combination of cards that are necessary, workhorse mechanics sort of cards that you know just have to be a part of it because of whatever, something about the current meta rotation or something about draft. Like, there needs to be these cards that fulfill these things. And it's possible that these sets have that, but it feels like if they're there, I can't get a sense for them. And a possibility is that they're still figuring out the game, and so they haven't honed in on that. But part of me hopes that they don't, and they maintain this sort of almost naive level of like fun, like we're trying out these different effects and these different cards in these different ways.
Yeah, I wouldn't say naive. I think it's intentional, and I think
it's intentional. Yeah. I think back in the day, it was a level of naivety from not understanding enough about the game, and this feels like an intentional design.
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of what I meant by like it still feels like there's a lot more to discover about the game, design wise, right? There's so much more to figure out, like the possibility and so much more time before things get honed in on as like, well, this is how you do it, right? It doesn't feel like there's anything that's like, this is how you design a sorcery set yet, right? It's like we're trying all kinds of different stuff still, which is really exciting.
Anecdotally, I just want to share, like, we just played a game before recording, and you played the Earth starter deck, and I played the Water one from this base set. And the Water one in particular felt, I can't speak for the Earth one, but like the Water one I was playing felt very cool. And I think only took a couple of turns for me to start picking up on like what it was trying to do and the idea of going and creating this body of water. And having all these different sort of creatures that can submerge and come out, and how I'm trying to sort of spread out my body of water like as wide as possible, but I'm limited because a lot of my things are submerged. Like, whether or not that was going to be good or not, I didn't care, because the story it was telling and how I was experiencing it, it was like clicking very easily for me, because, and I think that even if there are a lot of various mechanics that I'm not familiar with, or there's things with the system I haven't quite picked up on or something like that, like that level of flavor allows me to pick up on what this is trying to say, the story it's trying to tell.
Yeah, and there's a cohesive story that unfolds in like not only your deck construction, but also in the way that your stuff interacts with the realm, right? In the way that like, oh, your creatures are submerged in the water parts of the realm. They can go underwater and they can come back up, and then, but it's only in the bodies of water that they can exist in, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. You can't do that without a level of simulation. Comparing it to something like Land Walk in Magic, right? Like Island Walk or Island Home from way back in the day, which means like if you don't control an island, the thing, you have to sacrifice it. Like that would be Magic's equivalent of this, where in Sorcery there are
it's literal islands,
yeah, like lands that have water on them, and they connect to form a body of water in the realm. So it is at least one or two more layers of simulation. Another thing we love about the game is that it is independent and grassroots, almost to a fault, if I'm being honest. In that when I was talking, the guy from Sorcery emailed me. He basically mentioned that they don't do any kind of paid advertising, and I was like, oh, that's great, because we don't do any kind of paid reviewing.
It works for us, yeah.
But what I will say is that I do think that this they want the game to grow organically in that way, and really embrace their players. But I do think that just in order to get the word out about the game, like at a certain point, I think you do have to figure out how to get eyeballs on it. You know,
right? I mean, I think that's the tough trade-off, right? Is it's between trying to get as many eyeballs as possible, right? But you won't know. So if you're trying to get your game out, right, you're trying to sell a product, it's about getting more eyeballs on it, or trying to get more of those eyeballs that are on it interested in it. But if you're not getting enough eyeballs on it in the first place, you don't know if there is a lack of interest yet or not. And so, I understand. I think that that's admirable, right? Trying to not do the paid advertising and stuff. But I do think like that is a big part of the business. And there's probably a lot of people that would love to play this, but just don't know enough about it.
Yeah. And they also only produce one set a year. So the one set, currently one set a year. So huge contrast between Magic's 7 sets coming out this year. So it really does feel like a big event when a set comes out. Gothic is the set that came out like last month or very recently.
I think it's exciting because not having really been like a fan of Sorcery prior to this, other than following it sort of cursorily, when there's a new set that comes out, people that are fans of Sorcery are just talking about the one set. It's like all they want to talk about and it's all they can talk about. But because of that, I think it makes it very exciting. Right now in the Magic space and many other TCGs, a new set comes out, but people are kind of talking about that set and a little bit of what the next sets are coming down the pipeline, right?
Yeah, there's not going to be a set here that's stepping on the toes of the set before it. The next thing that we love, they understand that like this is the game that they want to make. This is a rare occurrence, I think, that we see even in the landscape of game design today, is that oftentimes designers are being led kind of by like, oh, well, what do I think people want to buy? Where here they're like, this is the game we want to make, and we want to find the audience that wants to play it.
Right now in the TCG space in particular, there's so many people that are either making a game because they're trying to make a quick buck. So they're going to be copying all the various mechanics or systems or whatever that are popular and proven to work. Or similarly, it's large corporations trying to make a quick buck. So they're doing the exact same thing, but they're able to staple their sort of IP onto the thing. And sell this speculative asset out to the masses. And so being able to see people that aren't worried about chasing that particular clout or chasing those headlines, chasing these as these heavy speculative assets is very refreshing, and really not trying to chase it because whether you want to see it as a problem or not, have limited themselves to where, like they have a long time that's required for them to make art because everything is traditional. When everything is done that way, and they can only bring on so many artists at a given time because there's only so many artists that are probably hireable to do this traditional work, like you are limited quite a bit on when you can come out with things. But if you're comfortable with that, and if your audience is comfortable with that, then that's great. All right. What do we not like?
Right. So this is what we sort of alluded to at the beginning of the video, that we're going to be honest with our thoughts. And there's some stuff here to discuss that is things that you should think about if this is, and this will really determine if this is a game that you want to get into.
And sorcery, because you might be watching, and we say this out of all the love.
It's possible. All constructive criticism.
All of this is constructive. We thoroughly enjoyed playing your game.
Yeah.
But we also have some thoughts.
I like how you're like leading up. It sounds like we're like, oh, we're going to fucking roast this
I know,
thing.
we're really not. It's not that bad. Yeah. No, it's not rift-bound.
So the first thing that you to understand about sorcery is that they start off their rule book with what they call the golden rule.
The golden rule says some text is intentionally informal or necessarily compact. Use common sense and be cool.
They clearly have a vision for the game, and that vision, this captures that vision that they have. Now, I think where some players are going to run into some problems with this is that the fact that things are left up to interpretation in such a way that you and your opponent are going to have a discussion sometimes about how to execute some kind of thing that's happening in the game.
One outcome is going to benefit you or your opponent more.
Right. And if you're playing casually with friends, probably not that big of a deal. However, you still might end up in an argument where you're like, well, I think it should work this way and I think it should work that way. And yeah, like I think telling somebody to use common sense, unfortunately, what is common sense about stuff, especially when you're playing a game that you've never experienced before, right?
I'll read a card here as an example. So we'll read the card, the Rack. The Rack says, whenever the bearer strikes an avatar, stretch them so that they also occupy another adjacent location. Then they lose 1 life for each location that they occupy. So them losing 1 life for each location that they occupy, that's fine. Sure. You've established that you're stretching them so that they also occupy another adjacent location. The problem is that you're stretching them. So what does stretching someone mean? And on top of that, then what are the rules afterwards with a stretched unit?
That's some of the weirdness, is that it leaves that up to interpretation in terms of like, okay, well, I guess they occupy all of these sites now. So,
but when they move, are they moving 2 sites over? Are they right? Can they cast from both sites?
Probably. I mean, I would imagine you treat them as though they occupy the sites, right? But I do think the movement aspect is like a little strange post stretch. But this one's not even the one that bothers me the most. I feel like there's certain cards that run into a situation where the obtuseness is not worth the story that comes from the card. Specifically, this card, what's it called?
Kairos the Archivist.
Yeah, Kairos the Archivist is the one. There's a couple, but this is the one in particular.
So Kairos the Archivist is a unit that says Genesis. That's essentially enter the battlefield. Archive the state of the realm. Archive is not an existing mechanic in the game.
It's not a keyword.
So like if you're hearing this and you don't play the game and you go, what's Archive do? You're not supposed to know. No one knows. Death Right. I'm assuming that's like a death round. It's on death.
Seems like,
okay. Yeah. Return all archived cards to their recorded state. Then banish Kairos. So how is this card supposed to function?
So you record the state of the game somehow, and then when he dies, you put it back where it was. Which, like, I guess offhand seems like, oh, that's like simple enough, I guess, right? But you're asking a player to do something that, okay, for instance, I was listening to an interview with the designers about this particular card, and one of the things they said is, oh, well, like, we're sort of assuming that players have some kind of access to technology, so they can just use their phone and take a picture of the state of the realm, right? And now it's archived, so when they go to put it back, they just have a picture. But if you don't, for whatever reason, you're going to have to spend a bunch of time writing down, if you have pencil and paper, where things are in the realm, right? And now if you have a playmat, the squares on there are numbered, so at least you could like write number 10 and then write the cards that are in that spot. The biggest issue for me with this particular card is that you're asking players to use their phones, which I think is in conflict with the game that you're trying to help them experience. The idea that you're going to pull out your phone and take a picture, look, I realize it's not like that big of a deal. It's not the end of the world. This is, and some people would think this is nitpicky, but I do think that if your goal is to maintain player verisimilitude, player immersion, that asking them to use their phone to archive the realm, I think is, for me, crossing, I guess, like a line that I don't know if is even worth crossing.
When I feel that this golden rule is not working, one example of when it's not working is, like you're saying with Kairos, is that it's a sort of purposefully obtuse way of describing a particular action, where if instead you were to write it out very clearly, it would not sound probably even, you probably wouldn't understand, right? Because you'd have to write out very clearly, like, I don't even know how you would begin to describe that in a rules text akin to a Magic card to make sure that you could play that out. It's like Shahrazad level. Like,
yeah, I mean, you basically draw out the grid, number all the spots, write the card names in every square that they're in, and that's how you would record it on a piece of paper, right?
And like, so instead you just say archive. And so instead, because it's obtuse, it sort of leaves players up to determine what that means and how it interacts with other outline cards and stuff. The other way that I think the golden rule doesn't quite work out is when there is just a confusing way of explaining a seemingly sort of simple outcome or function that a card should have. So we actually just ran into this card. This card is called Ice Lance. And it's a pretty standard ability by the sounds of it. Shoot a piercing projectile, deal 3, then 2, then 1 damage to up to 1 unit at each of the first 3 locations along its path. Whatever this card does, in theory, is meant to be a pretty simple effect. You're shooting a projectile that does, I think, less and less damage as it's getting further from the target that's shooting the projectile. Right. However, the way that it's phrasing it as deal 3, then 2, then 1 damage to up to 1 unit at each of the first 3 locations along its path sort of means that you could deal 3 and then 0 to a unit if you don't want to, and then 1 to another unit.
Or even like 003? You see what I'm saying? Like you can say...
It does say 3, then 2, then 1.
Right.
So I do think you have to do... Well, you're right, because you deal 3, then 2, then 1
if
damage.
If 3 is the first amount of damage that you do, and you've chosen not to deal damage to the first 2 spots, you see what I'm saying? Like, to me, I'm like, you could maybe interpret the wording that way.
The problem is you could interpret it a lot of different ways because it's just not super clean. And like the issue I have with that is mostly that when you have something apparently, especially a seemingly simple function, right? It's a simple card that serves a simple function. When even that's difficult to interpret, it takes you out of the game, of the immersion, right? As opposed to adding to that flavor and adding to this world and this narrative, it actually removes you and it reminds you that you're in a game because you're going, wait, what the fuck? What happened? It reminds me of this idea, apparently in writing, called gorilla in a phone booth. Writing concept where a highly unusual, distracting element, the gorilla, is suddenly inserted into a scene, pulling focus from the main plot. That's sort of what these obtuse rules texts end up creating, is it creates this moment where you're like, wait, what was that? And that's distracting from the cool feeling or the cool narrative that you're trying to get across with your game.
And there's a flip side to this when it works really well. And we were talking about the card Demonic Contract, which, as many people have, in that I think this is a way that you can use the rules flexibility to do something really interesting that ends up being almost a meta It's sort of like understanding that your game is played in the context of being a game, in the context of a community, so that why don't we read Demonic Contract?
Yeah, I'll read Demonic Contract. So Demonic Contract says, search your spellbook for any card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle afterward.
And that's
it's very, very clear.
Big bold print, right?
Underneath all that is a fine print that says, you may only search for a spell that has rarity lower or equal to a demon minion that you control. As an additional cost to cast Demonic Contract, you must pay 4 life or reach another accord with said demon by sacrificing a coin, egg, frog, gem, goat, rune, treasure, or mortal soul. So the way that I think this is successful is that there's really not many different ways you could interpret this. Even though it has silly fine print at the very bottom, which is very flavorful, even reading the flavorful fine print at the bottom, there's not a lot of different ways that you could accidentally misinterpret this.
Right, and I love that it lists out all of these different things that you could sacrifice, which is it's phenomenal. Like this card, I'm like, this is peak, right? This is exactly
this card is fantastic.
Yeah, like this is what sorcery does best. But then when you have these other ones that are a bit just more obtuse for not really the same kind of payoff, I'm like, well, those could probably be cleaned up. And they'll get better at this over time, I think. The other thing with Demonic Contract, this almost ties into one of the things that I love most about, I think both of us love most about Elden Ring. Elden Ring is also kind of purposefully obtuse. And part of it is because they know that their game exists in a community of people. And when you need to interpret something, you go to that community and you say, hey, community, what exactly does this do? And there's people in the community that pride themselves on knowing how those things are supposed to work. And because you have this obtuseness and this interpretation part of it, you have the ability sort of to develop sort of experts in your community, but also there's this discoverability that happens. And on top of that, especially with something like Demonic Contract, you have this meta narrative that happens where you have players that say, somebody reads it and goes, ooh, this card's so good. And then somebody else goes, did you read the fine print? And that moment is what we're talking about. Like that's peak and why you want flexibility, if you do, in your rules, to leave something up to that kind of interpretation. Because that's such a special bonding moment for the community, I think, at large. And if instead this card said, search your library for a card, sacrifice a creature.
Right.
You don't get any of that.
Is someone still going to be able to get the flavor, right? But this amount of flavor, right, is what sells this. Especially that list. Half of those things on that list could not even be in the game at the moment. Next on our list of
loving feedback.
Death's Door.
Yeah. So Death's Door is interesting.
When any player is reduced to 0 health, they're technically not dead. They enter, they are at Death's Door. And so previously, you could attack a player's sites directly and deal damage to them. And then once they're at Death's Door, you can no longer deal damage by attacking their sites. You have to deal damage directly to the avatar.
From my understanding, when the game was initially released, you couldn't even deal damage by attacking the sites. It had to be all dealt directly to the avatar.
Oh.
I'm pretty sure that's the case. And so there's been some sort of rules adjustments because I think already because of this type of problem, and a lot of it comes down to if any of you have played like a real-time strategy game and you get down to like your opponent's last units, and then let's say StarCraft, they pick up their orbital command and they fly it off to a corner way off in the far of the map, and it takes you 20 minutes to go track it down and kill it. It's just such a frustrating experience to finish the game.
All it ends up being is just you chasing someone down.
With the pre-con decks, this has been a problem multiple times already in the games that we played, in that it ends up in this like king versus king chess like thing where you're just sort of like moving one square at a time back and forth until finally something happens that gets the game done.
In fact, the game that we just played, where I was playing the water structure deck, it really felt like that. We both ended up going to Death's Door. And it sort of felt like, oh, okay, well, like now it matters. Because previously, like, yeah, you're attacking my sites, I'm attacking your sites. Sometimes we'll remove each other's things, but like, it doesn't matter until you're at that last hit.
Well, and this was a criticism we have of Riftbound too, right? Where like the last point that you get has to be like, oh, I claim both battlefields or I hold one. And what it does is it puts a extreme emphasis on that last thing. I'm assuming this problem is probably not as pervasive in high level play. But it's hard to know. It's hard to know.
At a systems level, this will always be a problem.
Sure.
Right?
It's always there.
So really at high level play, it's probably just that they're playing mechanics that don't have this present itself as a problem. And that would be playing like airborne units. Yeah. It's playing units that essentially can move more than just once per turn.
Right. And it also focuses the game in on those particular pieces of interaction, like either the airborne units or the projectiles, or like, all right, well, you're going to have to do that in order to close the game out. Let me defend Death's Door for just 1 minute, because I think the reason why it's here is because you're trying to prevent this one-turn kill combo problem, right? In games that operate at sorcery speed, if you don't have any way to interact with your opponent on their turn, they might be able to just win the game before you're able to do anything. And so I think Death's Door probably comes out of that problem. Like, okay, well, we have to ensure that players will always get at least a turn to try to do something. If my hypothesis is correct, which I'm not entirely sure it is, but let's say that Death's Door is here so that you can prevent this one-turn kill problem. They've already subverted this with a card that they printed in the game that's called Courtesan Theus.
Courtesan Theus has Genesis, enter the battlefield essentially. During their next turn, each player is controlled by the previous one.
And so effectively what this does is there's a one-turn kill combo in the game, and it's you do some stuff that gets your opponent from 20 to 0, and then you play Courtesan Theus, and you control their next turn, which means that they're at Death's Door, but you control them. And so you can effectively kill them all in one turn without Death's Door ever being a factor. And to me, this is like a mechanical, like, do not cross line. That if you're saying Death's Door is our ability to maintain not having one-turn kill combos, that there's always a turn for the opponent to respond, then you can't subvert it immediately with a card that makes it so you can control your opponent's next turn. So that was my big, like, this is across a line here. Honestly, they should ban this card. I feel like this card should just be gone completely from the game because it subverts this exact thing that I feel like Death's Door is solving. The last thing to touch on, it's the thorn in our paw, which is errata. They've errated somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 cards. Some of them are substantial gameplay changes. Most of them, I think, have come from competitive play, cards that were just a little too powerful, like Druid, where Druid had the ability to summon a 1/1 flying spellcaster.
I think this is probably going to be where they're going to see the most tension, I think, with their design. And I think I actually forgot to put this in the notes, but I think it's worth mentioning that I think they're going to have a tough time really honing in and finding a right audience for this, because they're riding this really fine line between disenfranchised Magic players, people that like old school Magic, but are probably not like incredibly invested in competitive play. Because a lot of the interest and a lot of the things that works very well with this game is the obtuseness that is inherently like opposite and antagonistic almost to competitive play. And so you're going to have a lot of these players that want that old school Magic and probably a strong sense of competition tied to that, which is, I think, just natural with 1v1s.
Their choice and vision, which I'm again, commend them immensely for choosing a particular vision and understanding the game that they want to make. But I do wonder if, is that audience still just being served by Magic? And with them tying themselves so closely to Magic, like, it's called Sorcery, Contested Realm. It's very like, hey, we're like Magic. With them doing that, I do wonder if that's part of the challenge, right? Is finding those players. And they're only releasing one set a year, so you could play Magic and this. I mean, there's nothing
for sure. I think that's actually a benefit to them is having a slower pace where they can sort of build up this audience in that way. I just think that it's going to be tough for them to understand, I think, the needs of that audience, right? If you're designing a full set of cards, how many of those cards are meant to fulfill a competitive purpose, right? Be an answer or response to some sort of meta or competitive play, as opposed to it being like, well, we're exploring the full range of what's possible with this game, right? Not necessarily in a competitive way. Like, I don't know if Demonic Contract was made because they're like, well, this is going to be a meta viable competitive card, or they had the flavor idea and they thought, well, how can we best sell this? And that's where I'm just like, I think that's going to be a tough thing for them to try and align with. And I don't know what side of the fence they're going to fall on.
Yeah. Well, and I guess we're sort of getting into the takeaways here and sort of our final thoughts. It's also designed to be played best of one. Part of it is because the games last quite a while, and part of that might be the whole like I got to chase you down for the death's door thing. But when your game I see them hedging against the fact that this is best of one because all right, well now let's make the collection, and now you can get sort of your sideboard cards from your collection, so they don't have to be put in your deck because that would dilute your deck, and no one would want to do that. So you just have no sideboard cards being played at all. I think like it's a decent solution, but ideally the game would be built in a way that you could play best 2 out of 3 in an hour. That's not the pace that Sorcery's played at. When your game is built for best of one, your game is consistent enough that a player is probably going to be able to pull off whatever. And I think the avatars play a role in this too, right? That's similar to Commander. It's always there. You're always going to have that effect available to you. That consistency is the thing that you're butting up against. And if you're best of one, this favors aggressive strategies because you only got to win one game. And
you're seeing this with Magic Arena right now, right?
Right, yeah, it's a huge problem in Magic Arena.
The difference in meta of best of one versus best of 3 is substantially different.
There's probably ways that they can hedge against this, but I think the system's forces are pointing in that direction. And I do think that led to Druid being a problem. But generally speaking, things that have charge and haste, like those types of mechanics here are the things that are winning the big tournaments. Now, they might not be as concerned with that. It might be, hey, let's just sort of play casual tournament-wise. Warhammer has a culture of sort of casually competitive play, but they do play all the way up to the most competitive levels of events. They also have that sort of like, let's interpret the rules together.
And when I hear 25 erratas or whatever done so far, right, like that's where I have to question what was those erratas, right? Was it for clarity? Was it because of competitive meta reasons, like they were too powerful? Like, I think it being too competitive makes sense, but then you draw attention to this now becoming a competitive game as opposed to sort of a kitchen table experience.
Yeah, they do feel caught between those two things, right? And I do wonder if part of it is like, well, what players are we attracting? Are we attracting a more competitive crowd? Are we attracting a more casual crowd? Like, who is our audience now? You know, who are the people coming to the game and what do they want? And that collaboration might lead Sorcery to different places. But I do hope that they stick with their vision, right? That their vision is this more casual, story-driven experience.
But this might butt heads with their vision, right? It might be that the audience that they are capturing is disenfranchised, 1v1, competitively minded Magic players.
I mean, we see this already with Eternal Durdles starting their channel for Sorcery, and I'm like, is that, you know, look, I love those guys, but they're very competitive, right? They want to do the Pro Tour thing.
Right now, it's hard to say if the designers of Sorcery not only are equipped and ready to go and make this highly competitive, you know, 1v1 game, but if that's what they want, right? Yeah. So, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see where they take it.
Overall, I love that they have this vision. I love what they're doing with the art. Like the hand painted art, incredible. The fact that artists retain copyright, incredible. I love the stories that emerge from the game when we play it. But yeah, I think the big challenge is, are you going to be able to attract players that aren't just going to play Commander instead? Like, how do you get over that hurdle? Which, like, look, that's kind of the elephant in the room for everybody.
So, overall impression, recommend?
Yes. I think if you've listened to everything that we said, and you think that the golden rule is acceptable and you're on board for these more obtuse cards, yes.
If you miss the days of TCGs when you didn't actually know what every single card in a set was because it was spoiled, or when you preferred to sort of play with your jank deck at a kitchen table with your friends or whatever, this is probably the vibe that you're looking for.
And I will say too, the community is very open and much more casually competitive, more like that Friday Night Magic crowd than it is like a Pro Tour crowd, right? Sure. So from what I've watched some community videos and things, and that's the vibe. And it's definitely the vibe that Eric's Curiosa, the company, is putting forward. Like, that is the vibe that they're going for. I think if that sounds good, definitely check this game out, especially if you like that sort of classic fantasy setting.
If you enjoyed finally listening to us talk about Sorcery Contested Realm after so much time, please feel free to give us a like and a subscribe, maybe a comment down below.
If you want to continue the conversation, you can join our Discord. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.